everybody, and welcome to today's video. I know that everybody is looking forward to the release of Nier Remake in a week, and fair enough, that is, after all, the greatest game of all time. But in the meantime, Square Enix has released another remaster that really should not go overlooked. When people list out their favourite Square Enix JRPGs, SaGa Frontier probably doesn't make the upper echelons of the list for most people, but this is a very worthy game, and Square Enix is no doubt hoping that the remaster will help it to find a new audience after it was left almost forgotten on PlayStation 1. It sold well enough on its initial release, it sold about 1 million copies, but it hasn't been a game that we have continued to talk about since. So Square Enix is no doubt hoping that this re-release will kickstart a new level of discussion about this game. And again, fair enough, it is a very good game, very much worth talking about. In comparison to some of Square Enix's other recent remasters, from Final Fantasy VII, which was a complete re-envisioning from top to bottom, to Nier, which is itself a very substantial facelift, or Trails of Mana, which brought a 2D classic into 3 dimensions in a very impressive way indeed. In comparison to those remasters, SaGa Frontier is a more modest remaster on the surface. There have been some quality of life improvements, such as the ability to speed up the action, and the sprites have been shined up for the modern generation, but the really big addition to this game has been an additional character and story arc, which is huge for reasons that we'll get into shortly, and with that also comes some new events and narrative and context that help to make this the complete vision of what the developers set out to create in 1998, even though the game itself doesn't look like it has been a hugely enhanced remaster of that original. It is also worth noting that this was a really ambitious project back in 1998, and as a result, to this day, it still feels very experimental and fundamentally different to other JRPGs you may have played as a result. At the start of SaGa Frontier, you choose between 7, now 8, different characters. That in itself is not an unusual way to start a game. In fact, many games these days do give you an introductory chapter that is different depending on which character you choose. What is different about SaGa Frontier, however, is just how different those characters and their stories are. They range from a wizard who's on a quest to become a master of magic, traveling the world to collect magic, with the end goal being that they actually need to kill their brother to take that step into being a master. From that story right across to a former model and superstar who is framed for the murder of her lover and needs to start their story by staging a jailbreak. Another story is of a man that is on the hunt for the head of a crime syndicate and dons a Power Rangers-like suit to fight his battles. And then there's also a lazy, good-for-nothing performer that finally gets thrown out of home to make something of himself. There are robots, there are monsters. These stories are all very, very different is the point. And when you combine those wildly different backstories with a sense of complete freedom, SaGa Frontier really does become this world of adventure rather than the story of a single hero or group of heroes. And you really do have a lot of freedom in this game. It's called a free scenario system, and what it means is that you have almost unlimited freedom to travel between a dozen or so planets that make up the world, or the universe I guess, in SaGa Frontier. And each of those planets have their own magic systems, their own enemies, their own dangers, their own technologies levels, and it's really up to you where you go and what you do within the universe that makes up this game. There's a less than helpful notebook that records the point that you're up to in the story itself, but it is very easy to end up on a sidetrack and on an entirely different planet by accident because you're not quite sure what you need to do next. Now, as you can imagine, this system was quite controversial on its original launch because it did mean that people could get hopelessly lost, and if you're not paying close attention, you can easily miss critical information with little to no way to backtrack to get that information repeated to you. For this reason, SaGa Frontier isn't really a new person's JRPG, or a good introduction to the genre. It is one for veterans of the genre, done by veterans of the genre, and on top of that, it is for people who like their JRPGs and have patience and don't mind getting a little sidetracked and lost while on their journey. It is for people who enjoy the journey more so than the destination as such. All of that has been preserved by this remaster, but I will say, in the game's defense, or to the game's benefit, I guess, in 2021, it is a little bit more playable and accessible because, thanks to the internet, there are ready sources of information online if you do get lost and need a helping hand getting back on track. I am fortunate in that I'm very much in the category of people that would enjoy this game, and I have absolutely loved my time with it. I didn't get a chance to play it on its original PlayStation release because it was never released in Australia. This is the first time that we in Australia have had a chance to play it. And the really compelling thing that I found about this game is its characters and its combat systems. The characterization happens in very short bursts of dialogue, and even to me it was a little jarring at first just how abrupt some of the transitions and plot developments could be. However, once I settled into the rhythms of the game, I loved seeing how each character found their place in the world and encountered some of the other characters that I recognized from previous run-throughs and different characterizations. The interlocking web between all the character stories is really fascinating to watch unfurl, and a good reason to replay this game. I would say at least 4 times with 4 different characters just to experience the different views on the world as you go along. You really do feel like you're a part of something as you play this game, rather than the agent of everything in SaGa Frontier. So where a Final Fantasy game, for example, you always feel like you are very much the focus of everything that happens in that game, with SaGa Frontier you do feel like there's all this stuff that's happening around you, and you're just part of the kind of the ongoing stories that are being told everywhere that you go. And that is a fascinating shift in narrative direction for the JRPG genre. It's not something that we see too often, because it is very difficult to do. If you think about it from a game design perspective, how do you give players the sense that while they have agency within their own character, there is stuff that's happening regardless of what they're doing? That is not an easy thing to do. It certainly requires a different way of thinking about narrative design within video games, and they've done a really good job of that in this one. Meanwhile, the turn-based combat system really highlights the SaGa series at its best. I've always been a fan of the SaGa series and its combat systems. This one does a really good job of that. You'll learn new attacks for your characters at random and on the fly, and so you'll need to be flexible about how you approach combat, because even if you do play through the game with the same character twice, you may have different sets of attacks to rely on a second playthrough. So you need to be flexible about your approach to combat. And while having a character KO'd isn't the end of the narrative, it does mean that they lose life points, so you do need to be very careful about your character preservation, which is a common feature to the SaGa series and something that I've always enjoyed dealing with. Sometimes when 2 characters use complementary special abilities, they'll combine to rain down one super special ability on the opponent for a lot of damage, and so you're also really encouraged to try different combinations in a round of combat just to see what works and what doesn't. And the difficulty level is generally set pretty high, and SaGa Frontier is more than willing to hand out game overs. So while that is not necessarily the most accessible way to do JRPG combat these days, for people that do enjoy the old school challenge, such as me, this one certainly provided that. So really, for me, the appeal of this game is that it is a steadfastly old school JRPG in terms of how it plays, of the PlayStation 1 era, and it is one that the developers have been comfortable leaving as such. The game has a wicked, quirky sense of humour, a brilliant series of settings filled with wonder and intrigue, and it is a rare example of a genuinely non-linear JRPG. It might not tread the same narrative depth as a Final Fantasy, and it might not be as traditional as a Dragon Quest, but so many of these games' structural and mechanical ideas were so far ahead of its time that it is fascinating to play this now and marvel at just how original it all still feels. You may well be waiting on the Nier remake, and you absolutely should. That game is going to be something special, and I will be talking about that as soon as embargo lifts. But a little like how I was surprised that Square Enix launched Trails of Mana's remake so close to the Final Fantasy VII remake, I do find it surprising that they've done it to this one as well and released SaGa Frontier so close to this game that's just going to eclipse the SaGa Frontier release, because a SaGa Frontier deserves a runway of its own. Anyhow, that is enough for this video. For more of my thoughts, check out my review on digitallydownloaded.net, which will also be live just as this video goes live. Please do click that like and subscribe button if you enjoy my videos, especially if you're a fan of JRPGs. I cover pretty much all of them, and you can look forward to plenty more of that on this channel if you're not yet a subscriber. If you do enjoy my work and want to support what I'm doing, please consider backing me on Patreon as well. You can do so for just $1 a month, or more if you're feeling generous, and that support will help me immensely in continuing to grow what I'm doing here and finding new and interesting ways to give you all the game coverage that I can manage. Finally, if you want to support us and you don't want to do it via Patreon, we also have a huge amount of merchandise available featuring the digitallydownloaded.net mascot, Dee Dee, and she is adorable and cute, and the merchandise is of a very high quality, so you can follow the link in the description below this video to go to our online shop. Other than that, thank you very much. Please do let me know your thoughts on SaGa Frontier once you are playing it, and yeah, have a great week. We'll see you at the next video.